The blood on Katherine Mallory's hands had been there for 3 weeks, and no amount of scrubbing could erase the memory of how it got there. She crouched behind a boulder at the edge of the Sierra Nevada foothills, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she listened to the distant sound of horses echoing through the canyon below. The posters bearing her likeness had spread faster than wildfire through dry brush, from Sacramento County down through the gold country and into the valleys beyond. $500 in 3 counties for a woman who had done nothing more than defend herself from a man who thought a wedding ring gave him the right to kill her. Now it was August of 1878, and she was running out of places to hide. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and danger. Katherine pulled her torn calico dress closer, though the fabric did little to ward off the evening chill descending from the peaks. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid, falling in tangled waves around her face, and her boots were so worn she could feel every stone beneath her feet. She had been beautiful once, or so people told her, with green eyes that caught the light and a smile that made men turn their heads. That was before Samuel Mallory decided she was his property. Before she had grabbed the fireplace poker and swung it with all her strength when he came at her with a knife after she refused him once too often. She had not meant to kill him, but Samuel Mallory had connections, money, and a brother who was a sheriff. The official story painted her as a murderous wife who killed her husband in cold blood for his modest fortune. Never mind the bruises that covered her body. Never mind the testimony of neighbors who heard her screams night after night. Samuel's brother made sure the narrative was written in his favor, and Katherine became a wanted woman before her husband's body was cold in the ground. The sound of horses grew closer. Katherine pressed herself against the rock, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had been moving northeast for days, following game trails and creek beds, staying away from the main roads where bounty hunters prowled like wolves seeking easy prey. Her food had run out 2 days ago, and the weakness in her limbs told her she could not run much further. A twig snapped somewhere to her left. Katherine froze, every muscle tensing. Through the gathering dusk, she could make out movement between the ponderosa pines. Not horses. Something else. Someone on foot, moving with the silence of a man who knew these mountains like the lines on his own palm. He stepped into view and Katherine's breath caught. The man was massive, standing well over 6 feet with shoulders that seemed broad enough to block out the setting sun. Long dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered his jaw. His buckskin clothing was worn but well maintained, and he carried a rifle with the ease of someone who had been born with a weapon in his hands. Muscle corded his arms where the sleeves of his shirt had been rolled back, and his chest strained against the leather vest he wore. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and watchful intensity. His eyes found her hiding spot immediately. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and piercing, and they studied her with an intelligence that made Katherine realize running would be pointless. If he wanted to turn her in, she had no chance of escape. "You are the woman from the posters." His voice was deep, roughened by years of little use, but there was no accusation in it. Just statement of fact. Katherine said nothing. Her throat was too dry for words anyway. The man took a step closer, then stopped, as if sensing she might bolt like a frightened deer. "The one saying you murdered your husband in Sacramento County." I defended myself. The words came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "He was going to kill me." The mountain man regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced back over his shoulder, toward the valley where the sound of horses was growing steadily louder. "Those men coming up the canyon, they are hunting you." It was not a question, but Katherine nodded anyway. The man seemed to make a decision. He moved with startling speed for someone his size, closing the distance between them and reaching down to grasp her arm. His hand was enormous, calloused and strong, but his grip was gentle. "Come. My cabin is a mile north. They will not find you there. Why would you help me?" Katherine found herself being pulled to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. "The reward, I do not care about their money." He released her arm and started moving up the slope, expecting her to follow. "And I do not care for men who hunt women like animals." Katherine hesitated for only a moment before her survival instinct kicked in. She stumbled after him, her worn boots sliding on loose stones. The mountain man did not slow his pace, but when she faltered, his hand shot out to steady her without a word. They climbed in silence, moving away from the canyon and deeper into the wilderness, until the sound of the hunting party faded into the distance. The cabin appeared almost without warning, tucked into a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was solidly built, larger than Katherine expected, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Deer hides hung from the rafters, and she could see a well-tended garden plot to one side. This was not the rough shelter of a drifter, this was a home. The mountain man pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter. Katherine stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. The interior was neat and organized, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and simple but sturdy furniture placed around the single large room. A ladder led to a loft above, furs covered the floor, and shelves lined the walls holding supplies and tools. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something wild that Katherine could not quite name. "Sit." The man pointed to a chair near the fireplace, then moved to the hearth to stir the coals and add wood. "When did you last eat?" 2 days ago, maybe 3. Katherine sank into the chair, relief flooding through her as her tortured feet finally found rest. "I had some jerky, but it ran out." He grunted in response and moved to one of the shelves, pulling down dried meat and a tin of something Katherine could not identify. He worked in silence, his movements economical and practiced. Within minutes, he had water heating in a pot over the fire and was cutting thick slices of venison. He handed her some of the dried meat. "Eat this first. Slowly. Your stomach will revolt if you eat too fast after going hungry." Katherine took the offered food with trembling hands and forced herself to chew slowly, though her body screamed at her to devour it. The mountain man watched her for a moment, then seemed satisfied and turned his attention to preparing some more substantial meal. He moved around the cabin with the confidence of a man comfortable in his solitude. "What is your name?" Katherine asked after she had swallowed several careful bites. "Pierce Xander." He did not look up from his work. "I have lived on this mountain for 8 years. I am Katherine Mallory, though I suppose you already knew that from the posters. The posters said you were a cold-blooded killer." Pierce glanced at her, his gray eyes steady. "You do not look cold-blooded to me. You look like a woman who has been running for her life." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past weeks. No one else saw it that way. Samuel's brother made sure of that. He is the sheriff in Sacramento County. He swore he would see me hang. Pierce's jaw tightened beneath his beard. "Tell me what happened." So Katherine told him. She told him about meeting Samuel Mallory 2 years ago, when she was working as a seamstress in Sacramento. How he had been charming at first, attentive and generous. How quickly that had changed after their wedding, when his true nature revealed itself. She told Pierce about the first time Samuel hit her, and the 100 times after. About the nights she lay awake, terrified of making a sound that might set him off. About the bruises she hid beneath long sleeves and high collars. She told him about the final night, when Samuel came home drunk and angry, raging about some imagined slight. How he had grabbed the knife from the kitchen and told her he was going to teach her a lesson about respect. How she had grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace when he lunged at her. How the iron had connected with his skull with a sickening crack, and how he had dropped without a sound. "I did not run," Katherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I went straight to the sheriff's office. I thought they would understand. I thought they would see it was self-defense. But Samuel's brother was on duty. He took one look at me and said I was under arrest for murder. He locked me in a cell and told me I would hang within the week." "How did you escape?" Pierce asked. He had stopped cooking and was watching her intently. "There was a woman, a saloon girl, who had been kind to me. She had suffered at men's hands too. She managed to get the keys and let me out in the night, gave me what little money she had and told me to run north into the mountains, said it was my only chance." Katherine wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "That was 3 weeks ago. I have been running ever since." Pierce was quiet for a long moment, processing her story. Then he turned back to the fire and ladled stew into a wooden bowl, which he brought to her. "Eat this, then you will sleep. In the morning we will figure out what to do next." "I cannot stay here," Katherine protested, even as the smell of the food made her mouth water. "They will find me eventually. I will not bring that trouble to your door." Pierce looked at her, and for the first time, something that might have been a smile touched his eyes. "Let them come. They will have to go through me." The certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Katherine's spine that had nothing to do with fear. She took the bowl with shaking hands and began to eat, feeling the warmth of the stew spread through her body like liquid gold. Pierce watched her for a moment longer, then moved to secure the cabin door and shutter the windows. When he seemed satisfied with their defenses, he climbed the ladder to the loft and returned with blankets and a pillow. You will take the bed." He gestured to a frame bed against the far wall that Katherine had not noticed in the shadows. "I will sleep in the loft." "I cannot take your bed," Katherine said, though exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. "You can and you will." Pierce's tone left no room for argument. "You are injured and exhausted. I have slept in far worse places than my loft." Katherine wanted to protest further, but her body betrayed her. She finished the stew, let Pierce take the empty bowl, and allowed him to guide her to the bed. She sank onto the mattress, which was stuffed with something soft and smelled faintly of pine. Pierce pulled a heavy fur over her, and Katherine felt her eyes closing despite her best efforts to stay awake. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. She thought she heard him say something in response, but sleep claimed her before she could be sure. When Katherine woke, sunlight was streaming through gaps in the shutters, painting stripes of gold across the cabin floor. For a confused moment, she could not remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, her heart racing. The cabin was empty. Pierce was gone. Panic seized her. Had he left to turn her in after all? Had she been a fool to trust a stranger, even one who had seemed kind? Katherine threw off the furs and stumbled to the door, pulling it open to reveal the porch bathed in morning light. Pierce was there, sitting on the steps with his rifle across his knees, watching the forest. He turned when he heard the door, and Katherine saw something relax in his expression. "You are awake, good. Come sit, we need to talk." Katherine stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her arms around herself. The morning air was cool and fresh, scented with pine and earth. "I thought you had left." "I have been watching the trails since before dawn," Pierce said. "No one has come up this far, but they will eventually. Those bounty hunters are persistent when the reward is high enough. Then I should go." Katherine moved toward the steps, but Pierce held up a hand. "Sit, please." His tone was gentle but firm. "Running blindly will only get you caught or killed. If you want to survive this, you need a plan." Katherine hesitated, then lowered herself to sit on the step beside him, careful to leave space between them. Up close in the daylight, Pierce was even more imposing than she had realized. His shoulders were incredibly broad, packed with muscle that spoke of years of hard physical work. His arms, where they emerged from his rolled sleeves, were corded with strength. But his hands, for all their size and calluses, had been gentle when he helped her the night before. "What kind of plan?" she asked. Pierce was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "The way I see it, you have three choices. You can keep running, but eventually they will catch you. You are not built for this life, and you are already at the end of your strength. You can turn yourself in and hope for a fair trial, but you said yourself that will not happen with Samuel's brother controlling the narrative. Or," he paused, his jaw working beneath his beard. "Or," Katherine prompted, "or you stay here hidden until we can find another way." Pierce looked at her then, his gray eyes intense. "I know these mountains better than any man alive. I know every trail, every cave, every hiding place. If you stay with me, I can keep you safe while we figure out how to clear your name. You would do that?" Katherine's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Risk everything for a stranger?" Pierce's gaze did not waver. "I came to these mountains 8 years ago to escape a world that values money and power over justice and truth. I have seen enough of men like your husband, men who use their strength to hurt those weaker than themselves. If I can help one person escape that kind of evil, then my isolation here has not been for nothing." Katherine felt tears burning in her eyes again. "I have no way to repay you. I am not asking for payment." Pierce stood, his movements fluid despite his size. "I am asking if you trust me enough to let me help." Katherine looked up at him, silhouetted against the morning sun, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, was offering her what no one else had, not even her own husband: protection, safety, a chance to fight back. "Yes," she said. "I trust you." Pierce nodded once, as if that settled it. "Then we have work to do. First, we need to improve your strength. You cannot run or fight in your current condition. Second, we need to find out what is happening in the valleys. If there is a way to prove your innocence, we need to know about it. And third," he looked back toward the cabin, "we need to make sure you can defend yourself if it comes to that." Over the following days, Pierce set about implementing his plan with quiet determination. He prepared meals for Katherine, ensuring she ate regularly to regain her strength. He gave her clothes that fit better than her torn dress, shirts and trousers that had belonged to someone else once, though he did not explain who. The clothes were too large, but Katherine belted them and rolled the sleeves, grateful for their practicality. Pierce taught her the rhythms of mountain life. He showed her how to move quietly through the forest, how to read tracks and signs, how to find water and identify edible plants. His teaching style was patient and methodical, and Katherine found herself learning quickly, driven by necessity, and by a growing desire not to disappoint the man who had risked so much for her. In the evenings, after their work was done, they would sit on the porch and Pierce would tell her about his life. He had been a trapper and a scout, he said, working for various fur companies and military expeditions in his younger years. He had seen much of the Western Territories, from the Canadian Rockies down to the deserts of Arizona. But 8 years ago, he had grown tired of the violence and greed that seemed to follow civilization wherever it spread. He had come to these mountains, built this cabin with his own hands, and had barely seen another soul since. "Do you?" Katherine asked one evening as they watched the sun set behind the peaks. Pierce considered the question. "Sometimes, but I prefer loneliness to the company of bad men, and the mountains have their own companionship to offer if you know how to listen. What about your family? Did you leave anyone behind?" Something flickered across Pierce's face. "My parents died of fever when I was young. I had a sister once, but she married a man who did not want her brother around. I have not seen her in 15 years. For all I know, she is dead by now." Katherine felt a pang of sympathy. "I am sorry," Pierce shrugged. "It is the way of things. People drift apart. At least here, the solitude is honest. Mountains do not betray you." "Is that why you are helping me?" Katherine asked quietly. "Because I remind you of your sister?" Pierce turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made Katherine's breath catch. "No," he said. "You do not remind me of my sister." The weight of his gaze held her frozen for a long moment before Pierce looked away, back toward the darkening sky. Katherine found her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the man sitting beside her. A week after her arrival, Pierce began teaching Katherine to shoot. He started her on a small pistol, showing her how to load and aim, how to control the recoil and breathe through the shot. Katherine's hands shook the first few times, the weight of the weapon bringing back memories of that terrible night with Samuel. But Pierce was patient, standing behind her to adjust her stance, his large hands covering hers to steady the pistol. "You are safe here," he would murmur, his breath warm against her ear. "No one will hurt you while I draw breath." The words and the solid presence of his body behind hers gave Katherine courage. She learned to control her fear, to channel it into focus. By the end of the second week, she could hit a target at 20 paces more often than not. Pierce seemed pleased with her progress, though he rarely smiled. But beneath the lessons in the daily routines, something was growing between them. Katherine found herself watching Pierce as he worked, admiring the play of muscle beneath his shirt as he chopped wood or hauled water. She noticed the way his hair fell across his face when he leaned over the fire, and the way his hands, so large and powerful, could be incredibly gentle when handling injured animals or tending his garden. For his part, Pierce seemed drawn to Katherine in ways he tried to hide but could not quite manage. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unguarded, showing a hunger that had nothing to do with food. When they sat close in the evenings, she could feel the tension radiating from him, as if he wanted to reach out but held himself back by sheer force of will. The third week brought the first real test of their fragile peace. Katherine was gathering water from the spring behind the cabin when she heard horses approaching. She dropped the bucket and ran back to warn Pierce, her heart hammering in her chest. He was already moving, having heard the sounds himself. He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself on the porch, then gestured for Katherine to hide inside. "Stay away from the windows," he commanded, his voice taking on a hard edge Katherine had not heard before. "Do not come out unless I call for you." Katherine wanted to argue, but the look in Pierce's eyes told her this was not the time. She ducked into the cabin and positioned herself where she could see through a gap in the shutters. The pistol Pierce had given her clutched in her hands. 3 men rode into the clearing. They were rough-looking, with the hard eyes of men who made their living through violence. The leader, a scarred man with a patch over one eye, reined in his horse and looked up at Pierce with an ugly smile. "Afternoon, mountain man," he called out. "We are looking for someone, a woman, wanted for murder. Dark hair, green eyes, probably looking pretty rough by now. You seen anyone like that?" Pierce leaned against the porch post, his rifle held casually across his body. But Katherine could see the coiled tension in his stance. "I have seen no one. I do not get many visitors up here." The scarred man's smile widened. That's so? Because we tracked her trail right up this direction. Seems to me she might have come across your little homestead here. The mountains have many trails, Pierce said, his voice flat. Most of them do not lead here. You are welcome to look around, but you will not find what you are seeking. One of the other men, younger and more aggressive, spurred his horse forward. Maybe we should check inside that cabin of yours, just to be sure you are telling the truth. Pierce straightened, and suddenly he did not look casual anymore. He looked dangerous. You will not enter my home. I have told you she is not here. That should be enough for any man with sense. The scarred leader held up a hand, stopping his companion. Easy now. We do not want any trouble. But that woman is worth $500. That is a lot of money to turn away without even looking. I do not care about your money, Pierce said, echoing the words he had spoken to Katherine. And I do not care for men who hunt women. You have my answer. She is not here. Now leave my land before I make you leave. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. The three bounty hunters exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. They were armed, and there were three of them against one man. But Pierce stood like a mountain himself, immovable and unafraid, and something in his bearing gave them pause. Finally, the scarred leader spat into the dirt. You are making a mistake protecting a killer. When we find her, and we will, anyone who helped her will answer for it too. I will take my chances, Pierce said. The bounty hunters wheeled their horses around and rode back into the forest, but not before the younger one cast a lingering look at the cabin. Katherine watched them go, her heart in her throat. When they were finally out of sight, Pierce waited several more minutes before relaxing his stance and coming inside. They will be back, he said grimly. They did not believe me. Katherine set down the pistol with shaking hands. You should not have done that. You should have let them search. They might have missed me. Pierce crossed to her in 2 long strides and grasped her shoulders, his gray eyes blazing. Do you think I would let those animals tear through my home, terrorizing you? Do you think I would stand by while they dragged you off to hang for defending yourself? You could be hurt because of me, Katherine whispered. You could lose everything. The only thing I would lose that matters is you, Pierce said, and then seemed to realize what he had admitted. His hands tightened on her shoulders for a moment before he released her and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. We need to be more careful. They will be watching the trails now. Katherine's mind was reeling from his words. The only thing that matters is you. Did he mean that? Could he possibly feel the same pull that she did, the same growing attachment that kept her awake at night in his bed, knowing he was just above her in the loft? The encounter with the bounty hunters changed something between them. Pierce became more protective, more watchful. He rarely let Katherine out of his sight, and when he had to leave the cabin to check his traps or hunt, he made sure she was armed and knew to hide at the first sign of danger. But the increased proximity only heightened the tension that had been building between them. One evening, about a month after Katherine's arrival, a summer storm rolled through the mountains. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the cabin walls. Rain hammered on the roof like 1,000 drumbeats. Katherine found herself on edge, jumping at every sound, her nerves frayed from weeks of constant vigilance. Pierce noticed her distress. He came down from the loft where he had been pretending to read and sat beside her by the fire. The storm will pass, he said gently. We are safe here, I know. Katherine wrapped her arms around herself. It is just, everything feels like it is closing in. I cannot run. I cannot go back. I cannot even step outside without fear of being seen. I feel trapped. You are not trapped. Pierce shifted closer, and Katherine could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You are protected. There is a difference. Is there? Katherine looked at him, at the strong lines of his face illuminated by firelight. Sometimes I wonder if I will ever be free again. If I will spend the rest of my life hiding, looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to find me. Pierce reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I will not let that happen. I swear to you, Katherine, I will find a way to give you back your freedom. The touch of his hand against her skin sent electricity through Katherine's body. She leaned into it without thinking, and Pierce's breath hitched. His hand slid from her cheek to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her lower lip. Katherine, he said, his voice rough, with something that might have been warning or desire or both. If I cross this line, I will not be able to go back. Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She knew what he was saying, what he was offering. She knew that once they gave in to this pull between them, everything would change. but she also knew that she wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that shocked her. After Samuel, she had thought she would never want a man's touch again. But Pierce was nothing like Samuel. Pierce was safety and strength and a gentleness that made her ache. "Then cross it," she whispered. Pierce groaned, a sound that came from deep in his chest, and pulled her to him. His kiss was not gentle. It was hungry and desperate and full of the want that had been building between them for weeks. Katherine responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his long hair, pulling him closer. He tasted like mountain air and wood smoke, and something indefinably masculine that made her head spin. Pierce lifted her effortlessly, his hands spanning her waist, and carried her to the bed. He laid her down with a reverence that made tears spring to Katherine's eyes. When he moved over her, she could feel the weight of him, solid and real and so alive. He kissed her again, then pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes searching. "Are you sure?" he asked. "After what you have been through, I would understand if you needed more time." Katherine reached up to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the soft scratch of his beard beneath her fingers. "Samuel taught me to fear men's touch. You have taught me that not all men are like him. I want this, Pierce. I want you." Something fierce and protective flashed in Pierce's eyes. "I will never hurt you," he said. "Never. Do you understand?" And she did. She knew it in her bones, in the core of her being. This man would die before he caused her harm. Pierce kissed her again, slower this time, taking his time to explore her mouth, her jaw, the sensitive skin of her throat. His hands moved over her body with exquisite care, as if she were something precious and breakable. Katherine arched into his touch, feeling things she had never felt with Samuel, had not even known were possible. Where her husband had taken with violence and callousness, Pierce gave with tenderness and passion. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, Katherine found a different kind of tempest. Pierce's body was a landscape of muscle and strength, and she explored it with growing confidence, learning what made him groan, what made his breath catch. He taught her what pleasure could be when it was shared between equals, when it was given freely rather than taken by force. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the furs, Pierce's arms wrapped around Katherine, her head resting on his broad chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady beneath her ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back, and Katherine felt something inside her, something that had been broken by Samuel's cruelty, begin to heal. "I am falling in love with you," Pierce said into the darkness, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I know it is too soon. I know you may not feel the same, but I needed you to know." Katherine lifted her head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. This strong, fierce man who faced down bounty hunters without flinching was afraid of what she might say. The realization made her heart swell. "It is not too soon," she said softly, "because I am falling in love with you too." Pierce pulled her up for a kiss that was tender and deep, sealing the promise they had made to each other. When they finally slept, it was with their bodies pressed close, two souls finding shelter in each other against the storms of the world. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Pierce was up before dawn, as always, checking the perimeter of his property. He returned to the cabin with a grim expression that made Katherine's stomach clench. "They have been watching," he said. "I found tracks near the southern trail, at least 2 men, possibly more. They are staking out the area, waiting to see if you will show yourself." Katherine felt cold dread wash over her. "What do we do?" Pierce sat down at the table and gestured for Katherine to join him. "We need to be smart about this. They cannot maintain a watch indefinitely. They will have to resupply, send messages back to whoever is paying them. We use that time to gather information. I need to go down to one of the valley towns, see what I can learn about the situation in Sacramento County." "You cannot leave me here alone," Katherine protested. "What if they come while you are gone?" "They will not." Pierce's voice was certain. "If they thought you were here, they would have stormed the cabin already. They are waiting for proof. As long as you stay inside and out of sight, you will be safe. I will be gone 2 days, 3 at most." Katherine wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in his plan. They needed information, and Pierce was right that the bounty hunters were in a waiting game. "Promise me you will be careful," she said finally. Pierce reached across the table to take her hand, his large fingers engulfing hers. "I promise. And when I return, we will figure out our next move together." He left the next morning before sunrise, taking one of the horses he kept in a small corral behind the cabin. Katherine watched him ride away, her heart heavy with worry. The cabin felt enormous and empty without his presence. She spent the day cleaning obsessively, needing to keep her hands busy, and practicing with the pistol until her arms ached. At night, she lay in the bed that still smelled like Pierce and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. Pierce returned on the third day, just as the sun was setting. Katherine heard the horse before she saw him and had to restrain herself from running out to meet him. Instead, she waited on the porch, the pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt, until she was certain it was him. When Pierce dismounted and looked up at her, she saw exhaustion in his face, but also something that might have been hope. "I have news," he said, climbing the steps, "good and bad." They went inside and Katherine made coffee while Pierce settled himself at the table, clearly organizing his thoughts. When she set the cup before him, he caught her hand and pulled her down into his lap, as if he needed the physical contact after their separation. Katherine curled against him, feeling the solid reality of his body, and waited for him to speak. "The good news is that there are people in Sacramento who believe you," Pierce began. "I spoke to a lawyer named Howard Chen who has been asking questions about your case. He thinks the charges against you are suspicious and he has been trying to investigate. Several of your neighbors have come forward to testify about Samuel's abuse, and the saloon girl who helped you escape has confirmed your story." Katherine felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "Then there might be a chance to clear my name?" "Maybe." Pierce's arm tightened around her. "But here is the bad news. Samuel's brother, the sheriff, is fighting hard to maintain the murder narrative. He has a lot of power in that county, and he is using it to discredit anyone who speaks in your favor. More than that, he has increased the reward. It is now $1,000 across 5 counties. Every bounty hunter and desperate man in California is looking for you." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. $1,000. "Pierce, that is more money than most people see in years. They will never stop hunting me, which is why we need a different approach." Pierce turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense. "Howard Chen thinks the key is getting you in front of a judge outside Samuel's brother's jurisdiction. If we can get you to San Francisco, there is a federal judge there who has a reputation for fairness. With the testimony Chen has gathered and a chance to tell your story without interference, you might be able to get the charges dismissed or at least reduced to justifiable homicide." "San Francisco?" Katherine's mind reeled. "That is hundreds of miles away. How would we even get there without being caught?" Very carefully, a ghost of a smile touched Pierce's lips. "I have spent years traveling these mountains and valleys without being seen. I know the back trails, the places where no one goes. It will be dangerous, and it will take time, but I can get you there." Katherine pulled back to study his face. "You would do that? Leave your home, risk everything, to take me to San Francisco?" Pierce cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Katherine, I would walk through hell itself if it meant keeping you safe. This cabin is just wood and stone. You are what matters to me now." The words, spoken with such quiet intensity, brought tears to Katherine's eyes. She kissed him then, trying to pour everything she felt into the gesture. Pierce responded with equal passion, and for a long moment, they forgot about bounty hunters and sheriffs and the dangerous journey ahead. But eventually, reality intruded again. They spent the evening planning, spreading out the rough maps Pierce had of the territory between the Sierra Nevada and San Francisco. He traced potential routes with his finger, explaining the challenges of each one. They would need to avoid major towns and roads, staying to the wilderness as much as possible. It would mean weeks of hard travel through difficult terrain. "We should leave soon," Pierce said. "Autumn will be coming, and we do not want to be caught in the high country when the snows start. Late August is our best window." Katherine looked at the calendar Pierce kept on the wall. It was already mid-August. They had perhaps 2 weeks to prepare. What about the men watching the trails? Let them watch. Pierce's expression turned hard. "I know a way out of these mountains that they will never find. By the time they realize we are gone, we will be 3 days ahead of them." Over the next 2 weeks, Pierce prepared for the journey with methodical precision. He gathered supplies, repaired their clothing, and ensured their weapons were in perfect working order. He taught Katherine to ride properly, taking her out in the pre-dawn darkness when they were least likely to be spotted. Katherine proved a quick learner, and Pierce was pleased with her progress. But the nights were theirs. They came together with an urgency born of the knowledge that their time in this safe haven was limited. Pierce loved her with a tenderness that made Katherine's heart ache, and she discovered depths of passion in herself she had never known existed. They talked for hours in the darkness, sharing their fears and dreams, building the foundation of something deeper than desire. "When this is over," Pierce said one night, his fingers trailing through her hair, "when you are free and safe, what will you do?" Katherine had not let herself think that far ahead. Freedom seemed like such an impossible dream, but lying in Pierce's arms, feeling more secure than she had in years, she allowed herself to imagine. "I do not know. I suppose I could go back to seamstress work, find a small town somewhere where no one knows my past. Try to build a normal life." "A normal life," Pierce repeated thoughtfully. "Does that life include space for a mountain man with questionable social skills and a preference for solitude?" Katherine turned to look at him, her heart skipping. "Is that what you want? To be part of my life after this is done?" Pierce's expression was serious, vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. "I want more than that. I want to marry you, Katherine. I want to build a life with you, wherever that might be. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a short time, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Joy flooded through Katherine, so intense it almost hurt. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Pierce, I want that too. I want all of it." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and when they made love that night, it was with the knowledge that they were binding themselves to each other in a way that went beyond words or law. They were choosing each other, consciously and completely, and that choice felt sacred. The day of their departure arrived too quickly. Pierce loaded their supplies onto 2 horses, keeping the weight distributed evenly. He dressed Katherine in men's clothing, tucking her hair up under a hat to disguise her gender. At a distance, she might pass for a young man traveling with an older companion. It was a thin disguise, but it was something. They left in the darkness before dawn, Pierce leading them on a trail that climbed steeply up the mountainside, away from the watched southern routes. The path was treacherous, barely wide enough for the horses, but Pierce navigated it with confidence born of long familiarity. Katherine followed close behind, trusting him completely. By the time the sun rose, they were miles from the cabin, high in territory so remote that Katherine doubted anyone had set foot there in years. Pierce kept them moving at a steady pace, only stopping briefly to rest the horses and take water. He was constantly alert, his eyes scanning the wilderness for any sign of pursuit. They traveled for 3 days through the high country, sleeping rough beneath the stars, eating cold meals to avoid the risk of campfire smoke giving away their position. It was hard work, the hardest Katherine had ever done, but she did not complain. Pierce's strength was inspiring, and his confidence gave her courage. On the 4th day, they began to descend the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada. Entering territory that was more heavily forested and offered better cover, Pierce seemed to relax slightly, though his vigilance never wavered. They passed within a mile of a mining camp, hearing the sounds of men and machinery, but stayed well hidden in the trees. "We will skirt around most of the settlements," Pierce explained during one of their brief rest stops. "But eventually, we will need to pass through some populated areas. When that happens, you must stay close to me and keep your eyes down. Let me do any talking that needs to be done." Katherine nodded her understanding. She had learned to trust Pierce's judgment implicitly over the past weeks. He had kept her safe when the whole world seemed bent on her destruction. She would follow his lead now. 2 weeks into their journey, they encountered their first real obstacle. The trail Pierce had planned to take had been washed out by recent storms, leaving them with a choice between a dangerous river crossing or a detour that would take them through the outskirts of a sizable town. Pierce studied the situation, his expression troubled. "The river is too high and fast. We might make it across, but we might also lose the horses and all our supplies. The town route is risky, but if we are careful and time it right, we can pass through at dusk when people are less likely to pay attention to strangers." "What do you think we should do?" Katherine asked. Pierce looked at her and she saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes. The river is too dangerous, and we cannot afford to lose our supplies. But you need to be prepared. If something goes wrong, if we are recognized, you run. Do you understand? You do not stop, you do not look back. You run and you hide and you wait for me to find you." Katherine wanted to argue, wanted to say she would never leave him, but the steel in Pierce's gaze told her this was not negotiable. "I understand," she said quietly. They approached the town as the sun was setting, 2 travelers in dusty clothes who might have been anyone. Pierce had positioned Katherine's hat to shade her face, and he kept their pace steady, neither hurried nor lingering. The town was a typical mining settlement, with a wide main street flanked by saloons and supply stores. Men and women moved about their business, paying little attention to the riders passing through. They were almost clear, the far edge of town in sight, when a man stepped out of a saloon directly into their path. He was drunk, swaying on his feet, but something about Katherine caught his attention. He squinted up at her, his face screwing up in concentration. "Hey," he slurred. "Hey, I know you. Your face is on the posters. You are that woman, the killer from Sacramento." Time seemed to slow. Katherine felt her blood turn to ice. Pierce's hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle, but before he could draw it, the drunk man started shouting, drawing attention from every direction. "The murderer! The woman from the posters! She is here!" Heads turned. Voices rose in alarm and excitement. Pierce did not hesitate. He spurred his horse forward, reaching out to grab the reins of Katherine's mount. "Hold on," he commanded, and then they were galloping down the street, leaving chaos in their wake. Shouts followed them. Katherine heard the crack of gunfire, felt the whistle of bullets passing too close. Pierce leaned low over his horse's neck, pulling Katherine's mount alongside his, driving them both forward with reckless speed. They burst out of the town and into the gathering darkness, the sounds of pursuit rising behind them. "Into the trees!" Pierce yelled, veering off the main trail into the forest. The horses crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes and exposed skin. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers grew more organized. A hunting party was forming. They rode hard for what felt like hours. Pierce choosing their path with instinct and experience, he led them through streams to break their scent trail, over rocky ground that would not hold tracks, through dense thickets that slowed the horses but provided cover. Only when full darkness had fallen and the sounds of pursuit had faded did he finally slow their pace. They stopped in a small clearing, the horses heaving and lathered with sweat. Pierce dismounted and helped Katherine down, his hands checking her over for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine." Katherine was shaking, adrenaline still flooding her system. "Pierce, I am so sorry. If I had kept my head down more, if stop." Pierce pulled her against his chest, his heart pounding beneath her ear. "This was not your fault. We knew the risks. What matters is we got away." "But they know which direction we are heading now," Katherine said. "They will send word ahead, warn other towns." Pierce was quiet for a moment, thinking, "Then we change our plan. We will not go through any more towns. It will be harder, longer, but we will stay in the wilderness until we reach San Francisco. I know these mountains well enough to keep us hidden." They did not risk a fire that night, eating dried meat and hardtack in the darkness before taking turns keeping watch. Katherine could not sleep, her mind replaying the terror of their near capture. Pierce must have sensed her distress because he pulled her close, wrapping them both in a bedroll despite the warmth of the summer night. "We will make it," he murmured against her hair. "I promise you, Katherine, I will get you to San Francisco. I will not let them take you." Katherine believed him because she had to. The alternative was unthinkable. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Katherine's life. Pierce pushed them relentlessly, traveling from before dawn until after dark, taking only brief rests. They moved through territory so remote that Katherine sometimes went days without seeing any sign of human habitation beyond the occasional abandoned prospector's claim. Pierce hunted for their food, his skill with the rifle ensuring they never went hungry. Though their meals were simple and quickly consumed, the physical demands were brutal. Katherine's body, which had grown stronger during her weeks at Pierce's cabin, was pushed to its limits. She developed blisters that broke and bled, muscles that screamed in protest, exhaustion that went bone deep. But she never complained, and Pierce never asked if she wanted to slow down. They both knew that speed was their only advantage. They encountered other travelers occasionally, and each time, Katherine's heart would race with fear. But Pierce had an uncanny ability to sense when they should hide and when it was safe to simply pass by with a nod of greeting. More than once, they crouched in dense underbrush while bounty hunters rode past on the trails below, so close Katherine could hear their conversations. One night, as they huddled beneath an overhang during a cold rain, Katherine broke down. The stress, the fear, the unending uncertainty of their situation finally overwhelmed her defenses. She wept against Pierce's chest, great racking sobs that shook her entire body. Pierce held her through it, his large hands stroking her back, his deep voice murmuring words of comfort. "Let it out," he said. "You have been so strong, my love, so incredibly brave. But you do not have to be strong every moment. I am here. I have you." When the storm of emotion finally passed, Katherine felt drained but somehow lighter. She looked up at Pierce, seeing the concern in his eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You have nothing to apologize for. Pierce cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away the last of her tears. You have been through hell, Katherine. Most people would have broken long ago. The fact that you have made it this far, that you continue to push forward, is a testament to your incredible strength. I am only strong because of you, Katherine said. Without you, I would have been caught weeks ago. You have given me hope when I had none. Pierce kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise without words. They made love that night with the rain falling around them, their connection deepening with every touch, every whispered word. In the midst of their desperate flight, they found moments of profound beauty and intimacy that Katherine knew she would carry with her always. In early September, they finally emerged from the mountains into the rolling hills that led toward the coast. The air changed, taking on the salt tang of the ocean, and Pierce announced they were less than a week from San Francisco. Katherine felt a surge of hope tempered by fear. They were so close to their goal, but this final stretch would be the most dangerous. The areas around San Francisco were more populated, with more eyes to spot them. Pierce modified their approach, traveling only at night and finding secluded places to camp during the day. He purchased supplies from isolated farms, paying cash and offering no explanations for their presence. The farmers, used to the rough types who passed through on their way to or from the city, asked no questions. 3 days from San Francisco, they had their closest call yet. They were resting in a barn Pierce had paid a farmer to use when Katherine heard voices outside. Through a gap in the boards, she saw 2 men on horseback talking to the farmer. One of them held a poster, and even from a distance, Katherine could see her own face sketched on it. She touched Pierce's arm and gestured toward the door. He moved silently to look, his body going tense. The farmer was shaking his head, clearly denying having seen anything. But one of the bounty hunters was not convinced. He dismounted and started walking toward the barn. Pierce made a quick decision. He positioned Katherine behind him and drew his pistol, his face set in grim lines. If it came to a fight, he would not hesitate. Katherine's heart hammered as she heard footsteps approaching, the creak of the barn door being pushed open. The bounty hunter stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. He saw Pierce immediately and started to reach for his gun. But before he could clear leather, the farmer was there, calling out, "Nothing in there but some tack and old hay, like I told you. I do not appreciate you doubting my word, friend." The bounty hunter hesitated, his hand still hovering near his weapon. He looked from Pierce to Katherine, his eyes narrowing. For a long, terrible moment, recognition flickered across his face. Then the farmer stepped into the barn, blocking his line of sight. "I think you boys should move along now," the farmer said, his voice friendly but firm. "I have given you my answer. She is not here." The bounty hunter's jaw worked as he clearly debated pressing the issue. But something in the farmer's stance, or perhaps the cold look in Pierce's eyes, made him think better of it. He turned and stalked out of the barn, mounting his horse with jerky movements. The 2 bounty hunters rode off, casting suspicious looks back over their shoulders. The farmer waited until they were out of sight before turning to Pierce and Katherine. He was an older man, weathered by years of hard work, with kind eyes set in a lined face. "I do not know what trouble you are running from, and I do not want to know. But I had a daughter once. She died at the hands of a man who should have protected her. When I saw that poster, saw what they are accusing you of, I recognized the look in your eyes. It is the same look my girl had. So you stay here as long as you need. Those men will not be back." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. You do not know what your kindness means to us." The farmer shrugged. "Sometimes doing right means standing against what is legal. You take care now, both of you." He left them then, and Pierce gathered Katherine into his arms, both of them shaking with the after-effects of fear and relief. 2 more days, Pierce whispered against her hair. "Just 2 more days, and we will be there." They reached San Francisco on a foggy September morning, the city materializing out of the mist like something from a dream. The sprawling settlement was unlike anything Katherine had seen before, with buildings stacked on hills and the sound of ship horns echoing from the harbor. Pierce guided them through the outskirts, avoiding the main thoroughfares, until they reached a modest boarding house in a quieter district. The landlady was a large woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Pierce paid her for a week in advance, using some of the money he had saved from his trapping days, and she asked no questions beyond their names. Pierce registered them as Mr. and Mrs. Xander, and Katherine felt a thrill at hearing herself referred to as his wife, even if it was not yet true. Their room was small but clean, with a real bed and a window overlooking the street. After weeks of sleeping on the ground, it felt impossibly luxurious. Katherine sank onto the mattress and had to resist the urge to weep with relief. They had made it. Against all odds, they had reached San Francisco. Pierce sat beside her, his large frame making the bed seem even smaller. "Tomorrow, we will find Howard Chen and set the legal wheels in motion. But tonight we rest." Katherine leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "I can scarcely believe we are here. It feels like a dream. It is real." Pierce pressed a kiss to her temple. "And soon this nightmare will be over. You will have your freedom back, Katherine. I swear it." The next morning, Pierce set out to find the lawyer, Howard Chen. He left Katherine at the boarding house with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the door locked. Katherine spent the day in an agony of waiting, jumping at every sound from the hallway. When Pierce finally returned as the sun was setting, she flew into his arms. "Did you find him? Will he help us?" Pierce held her close, and she could feel some of the tension ease from his body. "I found him. He will help us. Katherine, he has been working on your case for months. He has statements from your neighbors, testimony from the doctor who treated your injuries, even a report from the undertaker who prepared Samuel's body that corroborates your version of events. He has built a strong case." Hope flared bright in Katherine's chest. "Then there is a real chance? More than a chance." Pierce guided her to sit on the bed, then knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Chen has arranged for you to appear before Judge Martin Blackwell the day after tomorrow. Blackwell is a federal judge with a reputation for fairness and a particular distaste for men who abuse their power. Chen thinks if we can get your story before him, along with the evidence he has gathered, there is a good possibility of having the charges dismissed." Katherine felt lightheaded with the possibility of freedom. "The day after tomorrow. That is so soon. Chen wants to move fast before Samuel's brother can interfere. He has already filed the necessary motions." Pierce squeezed her hands. "You will need to be brave, Katherine. You will have to testify to tell your story in front of a courtroom full of strangers." "Can you do that?" Katherine thought about everything she had endured, the weeks of running, the terror and exhaustion, and the strength she had found within herself that she never knew existed. "Yes, if it means an end to this nightmare, I can do it." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Howard Chen came to the boarding house to meet Katherine and prepare her for the hearing. He was a slender Chinese man in his 30s with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put Katherine at ease. He explained the process, the questions she would be asked, and what to expect from the prosecution. "Samuel's brother has been notified of the hearing," Chen explained. "He will likely send a representative to argue the case against you. They will try to paint you as a cold-blooded killer. You must remain calm and stick to the truth. Let your story speak for itself." That night, Katherine could not sleep. She lay in Pierce's arms, watching the moonlight play across the ceiling, and thought about the day ahead. Pierce seemed to sense her turmoil because he pulled her closer, his hands stroking her hair in a soothing rhythm. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "know that I love you. Know that I will stand beside you today and every day after. If the worst happens, if they do not believe you, we will run again. I will take you somewhere they will never find us, and we will build a life together in secret if we must. You are not alone in this, Katherine. You will never be alone again." Katherine turned to face him, her heart so full of love for this man that it ached. "How did I get so lucky? How did I, of all people, stumble onto the mountain of the one man in all the world who would risk everything to save me?" Pierce smiled, a rare expression that transformed his rugged face. "I think perhaps we saved each other." They made love then, slow and tender, each touch a promise and a prayer. When they finally slept, it was with their bodies entwined, taking strength from each other for the trial ahead. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bright. Katherine dressed in a simple but respectable dress that Chen had arranged for her to borrow, and Pierce wore the cleanest clothes he owned. They met Chen outside the courthouse, an imposing stone building in the heart of the city. The lawyer looked them over with an approving nod. "You look credible and honest. That is important. Remember, Katherine, answer the questions truthfully and simply. Do not embellish, but do not minimize what you suffered either. The truth is your strongest defense." They entered the courthouse, and Katherine felt her stomach clench with nerves. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, with wooden benches for spectators and a raised platform for the judge. A handful of people were already seated, including a hard-faced man in a suit who Chen identified as the lawyer sent by Samuel's brother. Judge Blackwell entered, and everyone rose. He was an older man with white hair and a stern expression, but his eyes seemed kind. He took his seat and gestured for everyone else to do the same, then looked down at the papers before him. We are here today to hear a motion to dismiss charges against Katherine Mallory, accused of the murder of Samuel Mallory in Sacramento County. Mr. Chen, you may proceed. What followed was several hours of testimony and argument. Chen laid out Katherine's case with methodical precision, calling witnesses who testified via written statements about Samuel's abuse, about the bruises Katherine had tried to hide, about the night she fled to the sheriff's office seeking help only to be arrested instead. The doctor who had treated Katherine after a particularly brutal beating described injuries consistent with repeated physical assault. Then it was Katherine's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye in the room upon her. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then sat and looked out at the courtroom. Her eyes found Pierce, sitting in the front row, and the love and support in his gaze gave her courage. Chen asked her to tell her story, and Katherine did. She spoke of her marriage to Samuel, how the charm had masked cruelty, how the abuse had escalated over the 2 years they were together. She described the final night, her voice steady even as tears rolled down her cheeks, telling how Samuel had threatened her with a knife and how she had defended herself in desperation. "I did not want him to die," Katherine said, her voice breaking. "I just wanted him to stop. I wanted him to stop hurting me. I went to the sheriff because I thought I would get help. Instead, I was told I would hang for the crime of defending my own life." The lawyer representing Samuel's brother cross-examined her, trying to poke holes in her story, suggesting she had exaggerated the abuse or even provoked it. But Katherine held firm, refusing to be shaken. When he asked why she had run if she was innocent, she looked him directly in the eye. "I ran because I was terrified," she said. "Because the man who arrested me was my dead husband's brother, and he made it clear he would see me hang regardless of the truth. I ran because sometimes survival means fleeing from injustice, not toward it." After both sides had presented their cases, Judge Blackwell called for a recess to consider the evidence. Katherine, Pierce, and Chen waited in a small room adjacent to the courtroom, the minutes crawling by like hours. Pierce held Katherine's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, a silent reassurance. Finally, they were called back in. Judge Blackwell looked grave as he surveyed the courtroom. "I have reviewed the evidence presented today with great care," he began. "The case before me is one that speaks to a deep failure of our legal system to protect the vulnerable. Mrs. Mallory has presented credible testimony, supported by medical evidence and witness statements, that she was subjected to prolonged and severe physical abuse by her husband. On the night in question, she was confronted with a deadly threat and responded with force to preserve her own life." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy. Pierce's hand tightened on hers. "The law recognizes the right to self-defense," Judge Blackwell continued. "When faced with imminent death or great bodily harm, an individual may use whatever force is necessary to protect themselves. Based on the evidence before me, I find that Mrs. Mallory's actions on the night of August 3, 1878, constituted justifiable self-defense. The charges of murder are hereby dismissed." The courtroom erupted. Katherine heard the words but could not quite process them. Dismissed. The charges were dismissed. She was free. Pierce pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she realized he was shaking. "It is over," he whispered against her hair. "Katherine, it is over. You are free." Chen was grinning, shaking hands with people Katherine did not know. The lawyer for Samuel's brother looked furious, already gathering his papers to leave, but Katherine barely noticed any of it. She was too focused on the man holding her, the man who had risked everything to bring her to this moment. "Thank you," she said, pulling back to look at Pierce's face. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for fighting for me." Pierce cupped her face, his gray eyes bright with emotion. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. You are everything to me, Katherine, everything." Judge Blackwell called for order and everyone settled down. He had one more thing to say. "Mrs. Mallory, you are free to go. However, I would strongly encourage you to consider applying for a restraining order against Samuel Mallory's family members if they continue to harass you. The law may have failed you once, but I will ensure it does not fail you again." Katherine thanked him, her voice thick with tears. Then she, Pierce, and Chen left the courthouse, stepping out into the San Francisco sunshine as free people. The relief was so overwhelming that Katherine's legs buckled, and Pierce scooped her up in his arms, carrying her as if she weighed nothing. "I have you," he said. "I have you, my love." They returned to the boarding house, where Katherine finally allowed herself to break down completely, crying tears of relief and joy and overwhelming gratitude. Pierce held her through it all, his strength never wavering. When she had finally cried herself out, he wiped her face with gentle fingers and smiled down at her. "Now we can talk about the future," he said. "Now we can plan for the life we want to build together." Katherine smiled through her tears. "What kind of life do you want, Pierce Xander?" Pierce considered the question seriously. "I want to marry you, properly and legally. I want to find a place where we can build a home together, somewhere with space and quiet but close enough to civilization that you do not feel isolated. I want to watch you smile without fear shadowing your eyes. I want children if you want them, and a life full of simple joys and honest work. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night for the rest of my life." Katherine's heart swelled with love for this extraordinary man. "That sounds perfect, all of it." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at a small church in San Francisco. Howard Chen served as witness, along with the kind landlady from the boarding house. Katherine wore a modest blue dress that Chen's wife had lent her, and Pierce had trimmed his beard and hair, looking almost civilized in a borrowed suit. But when he looked at Katherine with those storm-gray eyes full of love and devotion, she thought he had never been more handsome. The minister spoke the traditional words, and when Pierce slid a simple gold band onto Katherine's finger, she felt the last piece of her broken heart slot into place. She was no longer Katherine Mallory, the abused wife and accused murderer. She was Katherine Xander, beloved wife of the man who had moved heaven and earth to save her. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house room, but it felt different now. They were not fugitives stealing moments of happiness between dangers. They were husband and wife, free to build a life together without looking over their shoulders. Pierce made love to his wife with a reverence that brought tears to Katherine's eyes. Every touch said, "I love you." Every kiss said, "You are mine and I am yours." Every whispered word said, "We made it." And when they lay tangled together afterward, Katherine felt a peace she had not known since before Samuel entered her life. "Where shall we go?" she asked, tracing patterns on Pierce's broad chest. "Back to your cabin in the mountains?" Pierce was quiet for a moment, his fingers running through her hair. "I have been thinking about that. The cabin was a refuge for me when I needed to escape from the world. But you make me want to be part of the world again. I was thinking perhaps we could find land somewhere between the mountains and the valley, somewhere with good soil and clean water, where we could build a home and maybe raise a few horses. Close enough to a town that you could have neighbors and friends, but far enough that we still have our privacy." Katherine lifted her head to look at him. "You would give up your solitude for me?" "Katherine, I have not felt alone since the day you stumbled onto my mountain. You changed everything for me. I do not want to go back to that isolated life. I want a life with you, whatever form that takes." They spent the next several weeks exploring the areas around San Francisco, looking for the right piece of land. They eventually found a beautiful parcel about 50 miles northeast of the city, in a valley with rolling hills and a creek running through it. There was a small town called Auburn nearby, big enough to have a general store and a church, but small enough to feel like a real community. Pierce paid for the land with his savings, and they began the work of building their home. Pierce did most of the heavy construction, his strength and experience making quick work of felling trees and raising walls. But Katherine worked beside him, learning carpentry, and taking pride in every nail she drove and every board she placed. They built a cabin larger than Pierce's mountain home, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen. They added a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, perfect for watching the sunsets together. By December, as the first winter rains began to fall, their home was complete. They moved in with a sense of accomplishment and excitement, arranging the simple furniture they had built or bought, hanging curtains Katherine had sewn, and making the space truly theirs. On Christmas Eve, as snow began to dust the hills outside their windows, Pierce and Katherine sat before their fireplace, wrapped in each other's arms. Katherine thought about how far she had come since that terrible night in August. She had been running for her life, alone and terrified, certain she would die either at the end of a rope or in the wilderness. Instead, she had found love, freedom, and a future she had never dared dream of. "What are you thinking?" Pierce asked, his deep voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive, Katherine said. I am thinking that somehow, in the midst of the worst time of my life, I found the best thing that ever happened to me. Pierce tightened his arms around her. The luck was mine. You gave me a reason to come back down from my mountain, to remember that the world has good in it worth fighting for. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Then Katherine spoke again, her voice soft. Pierce, I have something to tell you. I was waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it. Pierce pulled back to look at her, concern flickering in his eyes. What is it? Is something wrong? Katherine took his hand and placed it on her belly, watching his face as understanding dawned. Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. We are going to have a baby, Pierce. You are going to be a father. The expression that crossed Pierce's face was one of pure, unfiltered joy. His eyes grew bright with tears, and his hand splayed protectively over her stomach. A baby? Are you certain? I am certain. I have been feeling different for a few weeks now, and I am sure of it. Our baby will be born sometime in the summer, I think. July or August. Pierce gathered her into his arms, his whole body trembling with emotion. A baby, our baby, Katherine. You have given me so much already. I never thought I never let myself hope, for his voice broke, and he buried his face in her hair. Katherine held him, understanding the depth of what this meant to him. Pierce had spent so many years alone, had given up on the idea of family and connection. Now he had a wife who loved him and a child on the way. The isolated mountain man had become a husband and father, and the transformation was beautiful to witness. They spent the winter preparing for the baby, Pierce building a cradle with his skilled hands, and Katherine sewing tiny clothes. The small town of Auburn welcomed them warmly, and Katherine made friends with several of the local women who were eager to help the new bride prepare for motherhood. In July of 1879, almost exactly a year after Katherine had fled Sacramento County, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Pierce was with her through the long labor, holding her hand and giving her his strength. When the midwife finally placed their son in Katherine's arms, Pierce looked at his wife and child with such love and wonder that it took Katherine's breath away. What shall we name him? Pierce asked, gently touching the baby's tiny fist. Katherine had been thinking about this for months. Patrick Howard Xander. Patrick after your father, and Howard after the man who helped give us our freedom. Pierce blinked back tears and nodded. Patrick, it is perfect. He is perfect. Life settled into a rhythm that was both exhausting and wonderful. Pierce proved to be a devoted father, surprisingly gentle with the tiny infant despite his size and strength. He would walk the floor with Patrick for hours when the baby was fussy, his deep voice singing old trapper songs that somehow always soothed the child. Katherine watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand with love. They made a good living on their land. Pierce broke and trained horses, a skill he had learned in his younger years, and his reputation for producing reliable, well-mannered animals spread throughout the region. Katherine took in sewing work, her skills as a seamstress still sharp, and together they built a comfortable life. 2 years after Patrick was born, Katherine gave Pierce a daughter. They named her Eliza Grace, and she had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. Pierce was utterly smitten with his little girl, and Katherine often found him holding her while she slept, just staring at her tiny face with an expression of awe. The years passed with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Patrick grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to care for the horses and work the land. Eliza was spirited and bright, with a laugh that filled their home with joy. Pierce and Katherine's love deepened with time, weathering the challenges of raising children and running a homestead but never losing the intensity that had brought them together. One evening in the summer of 1885, after the children were asleep, Pierce and Katherine sat on their porch watching the sunset. Patrick was now 6 years old and Eliza 4, both healthy and happy. The homestead had prospered, and they had expanded their holdings to include more land and a larger barn. "Do you ever think about that night on the mountain?" Katherine asked, leaning against Pierce's shoulder. "The night you found me hiding behind that boulder?" Pierce put his arm around her, pulling her close. "I think about it often. I think about how close you came to being caught, to being killed, and I think about how empty my life would be if I had chosen to ignore those posters, if I had let those bounty hunters take you." "You said they would have to go through you," Katherine remembered. "You meant it. I meant it then, and I would mean it now." Pierce turned to look at her, his gray eyes still as intense as they had been that first night. "Katherine, you are my whole world, you and the children. Everything good in my life traces back to the day you stumbled onto my mountain." Katherine reached up to touch his face, the face she had grown to love more with each passing day. "I was running for my life, terrified and alone. I thought my story would end in death or capture. Instead, it was the beginning of everything beautiful. You saved me, Pierce, in every way a person can be saved." Pierce kissed her, slow and deep, a kiss that held 7 years of love and devotion and gratitude. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "We saved each other," Pierce said, echoing the words he had spoken on the night before her hearing, "and we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Pierce and Katherine sat together in the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had fought so hard to create. Their children slept peacefully inside, safe and loved. The past, with all its terrors and pain, had been transformed into a foundation for something strong and beautiful. Katherine thought about the woman she had been, broken by abuse and running from false accusations. That woman had found a mountain man who saw past the fear and the wanted posters to the person underneath. He had risked everything to give her a chance at freedom, at justice, at love, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, a future filled with hope and happiness and the simple joys of a life shared with someone who truly loved her. The bounty hunters had never caught up with them. The charges had been dismissed, and Katherine's name had been cleared. Samuel's brother had tried to cause trouble a few times in the early years, sending threatening letters and making accusations. But Judge Blackwell had been true to his word, ensuring that Katherine was protected under the law. Eventually, the harassment had stopped, and Samuel Mallory had faded into an unpleasant memory rather than a living threat. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Pierce and Katherine remained on their porch, content in each other's presence. They had traveled a long and difficult road to reach this place of peace, but every hardship had been worth it for the life they now lived. They had proven that love could triumph over injustice, that courage could overcome fear, and that two broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful from the fragments of their pasts. Their story was one of survival and redemption, of a desperate woman and a solitary man who found each other when they needed it most. It was a tale of the Old West, where justice was often hard to find and harder to keep, but where good people could still make a stand and win against the darkness. And most of all, it was a love story, one that would continue for all the days of their lives, a testament to the power of standing firm and declaring that evil will have to go through us before it can triumph. In the years that followed, Patrick and Eliza would grow up hearing the story of how their parents met, though the details would be softened for young ears. They would know that their father had been a strong, brave man who had rescued their mother from danger. They would understand that their mother had survived great hardship to build a life of freedom and love. The children would grow to be good people, shaped by the examples of courage and devotion they saw every day in their parents. Pierce continued to train horses, his reputation spreading far enough that buyers came from as far as Sacramento and San Francisco to purchase his animals. He trained Patrick in the work, passing down his knowledge and skills. Katherine expanded her sewing into a proper business, eventually teaching Eliza the craft. The family prospered, becoming an integral part of the Auburn community. On their 10th anniversary, Pierce took Katherine back to his cabin in the mountains. They left the children with trusted friends and made the journey together, following the trails Pierce had used to bring Katherine to safety so many years before. The cabin was still standing, weathered but solid, exactly as Pierce had left it. They spent 3 days there, reliving their early time together, talking about how much their lives had changed. On their last night, as they lay together in the bed where they had first made love, Katherine thanked Pierce again for taking a chance on a desperate stranger. "I saw you behind that boulder," Pierce said, "and something in me knew that you were important, knew that my life was about to change. I did not understand it then, but I trusted that instinct." "I am glad you did," Katherine whispered. "I am so very glad." When they returned home, Patrick and Eliza greeted them with such joy and enthusiasm that Katherine felt her eyes well with tears. This was her family. This was the life she had never dared dream of when she was running through the mountains with a price on her head. And it was all real, all solid, all hers. As Katherine tucked her children into bed that night, She told them a simplified version of the story of how she and their father had met. She told them about the brave mountain man who had protected her when she needed help. Patrick listened with wide eyes and declared he would be just like his father when he grew up. Eliza snuggled close and said she was glad her papa had been so brave. Later, when the children were asleep and Katherine was once again in Pierce's arms, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. There had been a price on her head in 3 counties. Bounty hunters had pursued her relentlessly. She had been accused of a crime she committed only in self-defense, had been hunted like an animal across the wilderness of California. But Pierce had stood between her and the world, had declared that they would have to go through him to take her, and he had meant it with every fiber of his being. He had protected her, fought for her, loved her when she had nothing to offer but her broken, frightened self. Now, years later, Katherine could look back at that terrified woman hiding behind a boulder and feel proud of her. That woman had survived. She had endured. She had found the strength to keep going even when hope seemed lost, and she had been brave enough to trust a stranger, to accept help when it was offered, to open her heart to love even after it had been so badly damaged. Pierce had changed too. The isolated mountain man who had been content with solitude had rediscovered his capacity for connection and family. He had learned that strength was not just about physical power, but about having the courage to be vulnerable, to love deeply, to commit himself fully to another person and to the children they created together. Their love story was not conventional. It had been born out of desperation and danger, forged in the fires of injustice and flight, but it was real and true and lasting. They had proven that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could be found, that even when everything seemed lost, there could be a path forward. That love, real love, was worth fighting for with everything you had. And so, as Katherine Xander drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, in the home they had built together, with their children safe in the next room, she knew that her story had the ending she had never dared believe was possible. She was free, she was loved, she was home. The price on her head had been paid, not in blood or capture, but in the courage of 2 people who refused to let injustice win. Pierce Xander had stood as her shield and her champion, and in doing so, he had become her partner, her love, her future. Their story would be told in the Auburn Valley for generations, a tale of when a mountain man with the strength of 10 looked at a terrified woman and said the words that changed both their lives forever. "They will have to go through me." And no one ever had.